The day after I got back home from building blocks, a co-op training in California, Hurricane Helene hit my hometown in the upstate of South Carolina as a Category 4. We hadn't experienced a storm this bad since a snowstorm devastated our power grid over 20 years ago. When we were without power and many without water, the small businesses and co-ops in South Carolina and Western North Carolina immediately responded by opening their doors to community members. Stay tuned to hear how it all went down.
I had this big idea to create a docu-series about co-ops, which will also include the making of into the series.
When I found out about this project, I knew that I had to reach out and I had to offer my support.
We talked a lot about our fascination with co-ops.
We decided to make this project a co-op. First, both of the co-ops I mentioned here are still supporting their community through the devastating impacts of Hurricane Helene. Check our bio for ways to support their work and other organizations to donate to. Thursday, September 26th, I landed in Charlotte after a really long flight from LAX. The rain was already flooding the streets of the airport parking lot as I got in my car. I still had a 2-hour drive to get home to Greenville, South Carolina. The power had already gone out the night before due to a different storm, and our town was simply not prepared for a historic and even stronger storm that evening. In my household, my partner and my 2 dogs, we had lanterns, batteries, coolers, and even a camping stove secured during a camping trip earlier this year that made the situation a little better when we had no power for nearly a week. We did not stock up on ice though, which would prove to be difficult for us. Friday, September 27th. We went to sleep on the 26th and woke up on Friday to no power and no internet in our home. As we drove outside, trees had fallen on power lines all around our apartment. Water had flooded through parks and streets in our neighborhood, and as I drove around trying to get phone signal, we learned that 97% of Greenville was without power. Homes connected to electric wells in our county were also without water. We drove to a local Chinese place 10 minutes away that had power and a line out the door. We waited a couple hours to get our first meal of the day, but we were so grateful to be there and share the space with others dealing with the destruction. To put this into perspective, even Walmart was closed. Even Waffle Houses were closed. All we saw were uprooted trees. We called and texted loved ones to check how everyone was doing. Do you have power? Do you have water? How is your home? Were the 3 questions we'd ask everyone we spoke with. I'll briefly hand the mic over to my partner Day to share some of their experience surviving Hurricane Helene.
Hey, I'm Day, the partner. When the power went out with no answer on when it would be returned, we had to figure out a way to charge our phones to reach friends and family. We found any way we could to keep from overheating with the hot humidity and no AC at home. We gathered our battery bank and our pets and headed out to try to find somewhere to charge our phones. We tried to take our pets with us everywhere we went and spent as much time as possible making use of the daylight on walks outside our apartment. That first day, we landed at a local coffee shop and shared some baked goods as we downloaded entertainment to our phones. That week, we ended up watching all 6 seasons of The Dragon Prince. Watching next to the light of lanterns really helped set the vibe.
On Saturday, we finally learned how to properly use a camp stove. We propped it up on a bench outside and connected it to propane tanks from our previous camping trip. Our neighbor with a baby came out while we were cooking, and we offered our camping stove so she could heat up salmon for her and her baby. Our food was quickly rotting in our fridge, so we tried our best to store it in a cooler as we chased ice around town, finally finding ice at a 7-Eleven 15 minutes away. I was reloading local Facebook groups daily to see where we could get a hot meal or ice or gasoline. After getting the hang of cooking and getting through the day without power for the 4th day in a row, news from Western North Carolina came in about the devastation they suffered. I saw videos of floods that submerged buildings, cars covered by flood water, and a devastated water system. I started checking in with friends and staff of several co-ops and collectives we know in Nashville who told me they were without power and water. I saw helicopters making their way up the mountain to more remote areas like Boone and Tryon that were very hard to reach. My partner and I decided to hit up our grocery stores, which were already stocked up, and make a trip up to Poderema and Firestorm, 2 community organizations distributing aid to neighbors.
With the help of friends and family, we raised nearly $700 towards supplies to take to communities in the North Carolina mountains. So many of us were concerned about our town, but wanted to extend love and support to our neighbors who were dealing with even more destruction. We hit up a Walmart and Sam's Club and stocked up with non-perishable goods like protein bars, tuna, feminine hygiene supplies, dog and cat food, waters, and candles. We based our purchases off of the many lists of donation items needed floating around the internet. We even received some provisions from the National Guard to take up to North Carolina.
We were still without power, so we welcomed any kindness and love we found. And the small businesses in our area delivered, opening their doors with free food and charging stations. Palapasi, an Indian fast casual restaurant, offered a free meal for several days in a row that consisted of rice, veggies, and a protein. I chose eggplant and chicken. It warmed my spirit and refueled us. Later that evening, we also stopped by a friend's house. 7 of us gathered in her home. She had recently gotten her power back and shared food that would have otherwise gone bad with us. It's hard to describe how grateful I am for community spaces like these during a difficult time. Tuesday, September 31st, I connected with Firestorm Collective and Poderema to drop off supplies. In a lucky twist of fate, Julius the dog, honorary Firestorm Collective member, needed blood pressure meds that were only 20 minutes away from me. We scooped up the medicine and made our way up the mountain. The roads to Asheville were completely clear and smooth, but the roads further northwest into remote areas of Tennessee and North Carolina were still off limits. Many expect they will not be fully functional until next year. Our first stop was Poderema, a community organization, co-op incubator, and so much more. Poderema is part of a network of strong, community-rooted nonprofits and cooperatives, including mobile home parks, an interpreting co-op, and a maintenance co-op, all rooted in language justice and immigrant justice. The staff and community members involved have worked together for several decades. I admire the folks up there so deeply. They've created a strong community based on love and care and share what they've learned with others all over the country. We arrived on the first day of their distribution, where about a dozen members of their cooperative system were split up into different tasks. A handful of people were receiving, tracking, and storing goods, while another group was planning how to deliver goods to a couple dozen mobile home parks around them. Their warehouse was starting to receive donations of waters, diapers, snacks, and non-perishable food. Lifts were employed to move stacks of water to the warehouse. Gasoline and even more non-perishables had been dropped off and were being rearranged. We added our goods to the pile and drove about 7 minutes to Firestorm. We were happy the roads were clear, aside from a few stray branches that hit our windshields and logs stacked on the road. Firestorm is a co-op and anarchist bookstore that hosts community events for political consciousness and joy. I had the joy of working with Firestorm for a few months on their social media before Hurricane Helene hit and changed our lives. We dropped off a similar offering of non-perishable supplies to their outdoor distribution, where volunteers were organizing goods into sections on tables, and other community members were shopping for supplies they needed. Their operation was autonomous and fluid, responding to what was needed in the moment and the goods that were arriving. There's a beautiful story shared in one of Firestorm's captions about how their distribution began. On day 2 of the storm, someone who was not part of the collective randomly posted a cardboard sign up with the words, "Community meeting here, Saturday at 2 p.m., on Firestorm's front door. According to Firestorm, 40 people attended the first meeting, followed by 400 people the next day. They continued operating as a distribution site until October 14th, when they reopened the bookstore on limited hours. And although the distributions at Firestorm and Poderema were organized differently, I learned a ton from the way they were both placing needed supplies in the hands of community members. After struggling to find a bathroom down the street from Firestorm, a comic book store finally welcomed me in. Here's what I learned when I encountered a bathroom without running water during Hurricane Helene. Using the bathroom becomes a completely different experience. Without running water, businesses or homes have to secure buckets of water from wells or other organizations to store in their bathroom. This might be TMI, but we were encouraged to wait after a few people had used the toilet before flushing. And flushing requires adding water manually to the tank. Some places had distilled water for washing hands, but others just had hand sanitizer available. I admit that it's so hard to understand what it's like to live your life without water and power until it happens. And many of our unhoused neighbors deal with this reality all over the US today. I'm recording this on Sunday, November 10th. We have power again, and our cities are slowly stabilizing, regaining power and water. Through this process, I learned about FEMA, likely for the first time ever, and applied for emergency relief for food and medicine. I'm still waiting to hear back. But the crisis just pointed out a lot of the issues our cities have to overcome. The water system in Asheville was already in need of an overhaul before the storm, and was just devastated by Hurricane Helene. Even now, many people in Asheville are concerned about the safety of the water that has been reinstated in some areas, and they continue traveling to community care centers to take showers and collect supplies. In Greenville, our electric grid took a huge hit during the storm, and many people around town are still having issues with their access to internet. So when government organizations like FEMA are underfunded and understaffed, we have to learn how to lean on the power of our own community. And this is especially true after the most recent elections in the US. During this disaster, I learned to treasure the local businesses, the co-ops, the friends who helped us get through this natural disaster. One we were never expecting. And still, we were able to pivot and care for each other. I left this experience feeling even more certain that co-ops and community care provide the support we need.
Subscribe to the channel to see the next episode to help support this project.